be tempting and understandable to be more lenient towards certain behaviours or certain incidents, but this doesn't negate the importance of boundaries and kind of keeping rules in place that may have existed prior to this situation. Often, well, we know that certain behaviours that challenge, like defiance that I mentioned, these may come from a feeling of insecurity or a feeling of low mood or anxiety. So we can validate the emotions that come behind these behaviours that challenge without condoning the behaviours themselves. Yeah, this situation doesn't mean that we can allow for things that wouldn't be acceptable outside of this situation. Often it's in fact our response to the noises that we're hearing when there are interceptions or when our phones are making noise in response to the emergency alerts that scare children more often than the actual sounds themselves. So they are likely looking towards us to see how we are coping and holding on to these things. So the next few slides cover some do's or don'ts, not an exhaustive list at all, but hopefully will be some helpful pointers when it comes to how to frame and discuss what's going on with young people. It's really important to acknowledge what's happening, and of course this will kind of come as the inverse on the don'ts slide, but to not pretend like nothing's happening whatsoever. It's important to validate that a young person has heard a loud noise in the sky and wonder what's going on, or that they've noticed how much of a change to their routine, their life is taking place right now, and why that might be. What is important to do is, rather than share specific information with them straight away, is to find out what it is that they already know. As even really young children will be noticing that perhaps their parents' routines are different, that their own routines are different, things are happening at different times, maybe they're not doing the same things that they do every week, and perhaps they have been seeing more of the news than they would usually see, or maybe they have access to social media or older siblings who are passing information on to them. So ascertaining their level of knowledge is really important so we know how to pitch what it is we want to share with them. Of course, sharing concise, accurate, and age-appropriate information, ideally in small chunks, is helpful, so as to not overwhelm young people with everything that's going on. This is a very complex and sophisticated situation to explain, even to an adult, so consider the child's ability to learn and understand this information and how best to package that information for them. Be really clear about how to keep safe during alerts and when things are escalating. So particularly if young people are returning to school soon, and I hope that is the case, that there is kind of repeated and clear guidelines about how everyone should be behaving and reacting, so that there's no ambiguity and that there's no confusion. We know in particular during times like this and in the modern world that misinformation is rife, and it can be really difficult to understand or know what is true from what we see online and from what we see in the media. So it may be that young people are curious about this, or maybe that they have seen something and taken it at face value. So where possible, try to educate around misinformation and perhaps explain how to identify reliable sources. So I'll share some of the links to the accounts and departments of the government that have been sharing reliable information towards the end. But yeah, this is a really important factor. Validate any feelings that are coming up. So young people may have the language or may not have the language to name some of those feelings. They might say things like, I don't feel good, I feel bad, and so on. I feel funny, I feel different. Okay, so support them by offering to help them with this language and try and understand what it is they're feeling, and when they do feel that, to let them know it's okay that that's the case, that other people might be feeling that too, perhaps even that you're feeling the same way as them, and that it's not just children that feel this way but adults too. And with this comes modeling behaviors that you may want to see from a young person. So as I said, they're looking to us to show them how to respond, and therefore it's really important to maintain that in front of young people. Offer reassurance through stability and routine. So of course this is disrupted during current circumstances, but where it's possible to maintain kind of order and things that would usually happen in a certain way, whether that's the length of a lesson or the structure of a lesson, whether that's just checking in with a young person in a way that you usually would, being set homework tasks, whatever it might be. These kind of familiar kind of aspects of their day, of their week, can really help to offer reassurance. Creating safe spaces to talk means kind of what it says, that young people may not always be in the right place to talk. They might not feel comfortable doing it in front of other people. They might not feel comfortable doing it online, for example. And sometimes it can help to talk whilst carrying out an enjoyable activity, something that helps them to regulate their emotions in that moment. I'm going to mention professional support towards the end, but of course, where indicated, where you have concerns about the impact this is having on a young person, please do consider this in your role as educators, of course, and within the counselling departments and safeguarding departments you will have within your school, but also external agencies like Maudsley Health. Now, this slide speaks a lot to perhaps some of the opposites of the do slide, but I'll go through each one. It's important not to force young people to talk about it. If we feel a temptation to do so, or to get them to acknowledge something that perhaps they're not willing to acknowledge or don't want to ask ourselves why that is, that we feel the need to talk to them about this. They just may not want to, or they may feel safer doing it with a parent or a carer or a different person in their family. Certainly don't lie, minimize, or dismiss what it is that's going on, or try to pass it off as something else. So it may be that some people tell young people or children that it's just fireworks. Maybe that what they think they've heard is something completely different, like the neighbour making some noise or a car, and that there's nothing to worry about whatsoever, because that may make a young person feel invalidated about the fear that they have, and perhaps is in conflict with information they've heard elsewhere. Try not to share graphic details or speculation online about things that might be too difficult to comprehend for a young person. Try to avoid stigmatizing or labeling people or countries that may be involved in the conflict, perhaps focusing more on the compassionate side of what's going on and thinking about those who have lost something, who may be more significantly affected by what's going on, and the people who are in roles to help us, like the police and the military and so on. Certainly don't pretend you have all the answers to their questions. It's okay to say when you don't know something, and that it's okay not to know. And that doesn't have to provoke uncertainty and fear, but that these are things we can find out, and sometimes there are things that are out of our control that we can't necessarily predict, and that lots of people are feeling the same way. Don't assume that a young person is oblivious or unaffected by what's going on. It's quite likely that they will be processing more than they let on, and it's certainly important not to assume otherwise. Don't ignore any subtle or more noticeable changes in behaviour, as this could indicate kind of more impact on the young person than perhaps we're aware of. And it's important not to try and hide or mask your own feelings about what's going on. It's very difficult, particularly in roles where you're caring for children. I'm sure some of you are parents as well. And to pretend that something like this would not affect you may not model or display the kind of behaviours that you would want to see in your child when it comes to expressing how they're feeling. Okay, so what does this look like in practice? I have a few slides with some speech bubbles, just maybe demonstrating some examples. I won't read each one, but it might be that you try to frame a question to a young person if you're initiating a conversation with them in a curious way, in an open way that doesn't assume anything, and just invites them to be open with their answer. So, what have you heard about what's going on? What do you think would help with how you're feeling right now? Okay. Perhaps it can be difficult to know how to respond to a young person depending on what they've said or what they're sharing. So again, it's very important to validate the feelings first, and then maybe to tackle the issue afterwards. So you may say to a young person, "Thank you for telling me that you feel this way. It's completely understandable. I feel that way too. We're all feeling more and bigger feelings than usual right now. Let's think together about what we can do to manage these feelings when they come." Okay. And there may be some more specific questions, perhaps, that older children may ask. And again, this speaks more to if we don't necessarily know the answers, or if we want to be able to say something that's containing but doesn't go into too much detail so as to not scare the young person. That sound is the people whose job it is, or the military, keeping us safe in the sky. I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that here and now we are safe and that the UAE government is working really hard to keep us safe. Things will go back to normal as soon as they can. So just for the last couple of minutes before we go into questions, some ideas. I'm sure you've been adapting really well over the last month or so. Some of you may even kind of recall back to the pandemic and how you had to cope during that time when it came to online teaching and just caring for young people in general. But where possible, tapping into a young person's existing skills, interests, hobbies can really help to manage their distress, whether that's having opportunities to be creative, just having a distraction where their brain is being occupied by something that they enjoy or that kind of challenges them. Where possible, of course, connecting with others, and there are lots of ways of doing that virtually nowadays that perhaps we were less aware of prior to the pandemic. Just completing meaningful activities that bear some kind of significance or importance to a young person that reminds them that there are lots of normal things that continue to exist in the world and will do so after this all is over. Routine we've mentioned already, having some healthy limits and boundaries around screen time and social media exposure, drawing upon a young person's strengths and times when they have coped with difficult experiences in the past. So I think certainly it's okay to refer back to the pandemic and to think about things that they were able to do to deal with some of the stresses back then, as there are some parallels between this situation now and that time. And grounding techniques, some of you may be aware of already, the idea that we can connect with the present moment rather than get too stuck in thinking about the future or thinking about what's already happened in the past. So some examples of grounding techniques would be a technique called box breathing, which is a framework for kind of relaxing our breathing, focusing on it by inhaling for 4 seconds, holding our breath for 4 seconds, exhaling for 4 seconds, and then holding again for 4 seconds and repeating this cycle. And we can visualize a kind of a dots moving around a box as we do that. And there's a YouTube video that kind of demonstrates that quite well. Otherwise, using our senses as an anchor to the present moment, using the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. So trying to think of 5 things that you can see in that exact moment, 4 things you can feel or touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And that redirects attention straight into the sensory organs and information that we're processing in real time, rather than, again, something that might be more focused into the future or the past. The A to Z game is a really fun game that I've played with many young people in the clinic, where you pick a category about something that they are interested in or know lots about and try to name something beginning with every letter of the alphabet in that category. It can be done in, individually, can be done in small groups or large groups, and it's just a nice way of distracting ourselves. But as we've mentioned already, any meaningful activity can serve the purpose of taking a young person out of their head and perhaps where they might be feeling down or worried and into the present moment. Coming towards the end, it's important, of course, to manage our own distress about this situation. And as I've mentioned before, young people are looking to us for how to respond to this situation, but also to model how to express ourselves and how to manage big feelings and big emotions. So make sure you're checking in with yourselves and each other as colleagues or with your wider support networks. How are you actually feeling right now? Who is it that you could speak to if you needed to? How are you meeting your own needs as well as the children that you're looking after? Be compassionate with yourself and realistic about what's possible in these circumstances. They are abnormal circumstances. We aren't given a kind of clear guidebook on what to do and how to live our lives during these times. So it's going to feel hard. It's really natural to feel that way. And for the children that we care for, make sure to be kind to yourself if things don't go to plan or you aren't always behaving or acting in a way that aligns with your values. This is normal during a time like this. If you were to snap or not respond as you would like towards a young person or to people in your lives, there is always room to repair. So don't lose sight of that. And remember that there's so much outside of our control, but please try to focus on what you can control, because otherwise our worries can go round and round and escalate when there are not things that we can do about them and we can't solve these problems. So these are just some brief tips about how to manage your own distress. I'm sure many of you are finding ways to cope with this situation already, either by drawing on skills that you have already or learning new ones through everything that is coming out of the situation. But please do seek professional support for a young person or yourself if you're noticing that your everyday life is being significantly impacted, if you're not able to do the things that you would normally do, even if that's something as simple as getting up out of bed, showering, kind of doing, making meals for yourself, whatever it might be, things that would be normal for you but aren't kind of as doable anymore. If emotions are heightened or there's significant behavioral changes that persist once things have stabilized, so it might be that things persist after the situation, or even if things were to calm down and you notice feeling that way continuously without that threat being present anymore. Or it might be that you or a young person is feeling overwhelmed and unsure about how to help the children in your care or yourself. So these are our contact details. They will be available through the recording of this talk, but please do get in touch with us if you have any questions, either about the contents of this talk or about specific young people that you would like to refer to our service. Our website is also there and our phone number. There's also a list here of the verified and trusted sources for information during this time. Please do continue to follow official guidance and direct young people and their families towards these sources if they're in need of these reliable sources for information. And there's also some more links to resources here that have informed the content of this talk and generally can be shared with young people. I'd also like to acknowledge the content of this webinar that was informed by work conducted by a range of current and former colleagues, including Dr. Charlotte Cousins, Dr. Sophie Price, Professor David Forbes, all working here at Maudsley Health, and Dr. Shoshana Lyons at Beacon House. Thank you very much for your time. We have a few minutes for questions. I will check the chat, but I don't believe anything has been shared as of yet. So please do post your questions in the next 3 or 4 minutes, and I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, it's been a pleasure. I can see a hand up, but I don't think the microphones can be enabled. So if you do have a question or a comment, please do leave it in the chat or the Q&A. Or if you have an experience of something that you've found has helped or worked during this time and you want to share with your colleagues, please do share that as well. I'll stay on here until 4 o'clock, so please feel free to have a moment to think about it and then let me know. Thank you to the comments in the Q&A. I think Aisha, who's on the call, will be able to explain how the recording can be accessed. I don't think it was initiated at the beginning of the talk, so it might be that the first couple of minutes is cut off, but I'm sure it will be shared with you in due course. I don't think any other questions are coming through, so thank you once again for attending, and I wish you all the best. I hope you stay safe, and I hope that schools can reopen soon so you can be reunited with your students. Take care.